The discovery of two Laozi silk manuscripts at Mawangdui, near Changsha, Hunan province in 1973 marks an important milestone in modern Laozi research. The manuscripts, identified simply as a Jia and B.C.E, were found in a tomb that was sealed in 168 B.C.E. The texts themselves can be dated earlier, the manuscript being the older of the two, copied in all likelihood before 195 B.C.E. See Lau 1982, Bolt's 1984, and Henrich's 1989. A documentary on the Mawangdui find was aired on Chinese Kect 10 in June 2010, which can be viewed from its website. The Hunan Provincial Museum website also provides useful information. Before this find, access to the Laozi was mainly through the received text of Wang Bi, 226 to 249 CE, and Heshanggong, a legendary figure depicted as a teacher to Emperor Wen, r. 179157 B.C.E. of the Han Dynasty. There are other manuscript versions, but by and large they play a secondary role in the history of the classic. A more recent archaeological find in Guodian, the so-called bamboo slip Laozi, which predates the Mawangdui manuscripts, has rekindled debates on the origin and composition of the Laozi. But first, a note on the title and structure of the Daodejing. The Laozi did not acquire its classic status until the Han Dynasty. According to the Shiji 49.5 billion, the Empress Dowager Du, wife of Emperor Wen and mother of Emperor Jing, heir 156141 B.C.E., was a dedicated student of the Laozi. Later sources added that it was Emperor Jing who established the text officially as a classic. However, the title Daodejing appears not to have been widely used until later, toward the close of the Han era. The Daodejing is also referred to as the Daodejing, true classic of the way and virtue, the Taishang Xuanyuan Daodejing, classic of the way and virtue of the highest profound origins, and less formally the 5,000 character text, on account of its approximate length. Most versions exceed 5,000 characters by about 5 to 10%, but it is interesting to note that numerological considerations later became an integral part of the history of the work. According to the 7th century Taoist master Sheng Xuanying, it was Ji Xuan, Flel, 200 CE, a revered Taoist adept, who shortened the Laozi text that accompanied the Heshanggong commentary to fit the magical number of 5,000. This claim cannot be verified, but a number of Laozi manuscripts discovered at Dunhuang contain 4,999 characters. The current Daodejing is divided into two parts, PN and 81 chapters or sections Yang. Part 1, comprising chapters 1 to 37, has come to be known as the Daodejing Classic of Tao, while chapters 38 to 81 make up the Daojing Classic of Virtue. This is understood to be a thematic division. Chapter 1 begins with the word Tao, while chapter 38 begins with the phrase superior virtue, although the concepts of Tao and virtue do feature in both parts. As a rough heuristic guide, some commentators have suggested that the Daodejing is more metaphysical, whereas the Daojing focuses more on socio-political issues. In this context, it is easy to appreciate the tremendous interest occasioned by the discovery of the Mawangdui Laozi manuscripts. The two manuscripts contain all the chapters that are found in the current Laozi, although the chapters follow a different order in a few places. For example, in both manuscripts, the sections that appear as chapters 80 and 81 in the current Laozi come immediately after a section that corresponds to chapter 66 of the present text. Both the Mawangdui A and B manuscripts are similarly divided into two parts, but in contrast with the current version, in reverse order, i.e., both manuscripts begin with the Daojing, corresponding to chapter 38 of the received text. Part 1 of the B manuscript ends with the editorial notation, Virtue 3041 characters, while the last line of Part 2 reads Tao 2426. Does this mean that the classic should be renamed from Daodejing to Daodejing Classic of Virtue and the Way? One scholar, in fact, has adopted the title Daodejing, Tao Ching. for his translation of the Mawangdui Laozi, Henrik's 1989. It seems unlikely that the Mawangdui arrangement stems simply from scribal idiosyncrasy or happenstance, e.g., that the copyist in writing out the Laozi on silk had made use of an original text in bamboo slips and just happened to start with a bundle of slips containing the Daodejing. Yan 1976-12 explains how this is possible. If the order is deliberate, does it imply that the original Laozi gives priority to socio-political issues? This raises important questions for interpretation. The division into 81 chapters reflects numerological interest and is associated particularly with the Heshanggong version, which also carries chapter titles. It was not universally accepted until much later, perhaps the Tang period, when the text was standardized under the patronage of Emperor Heshanggong, R. 712-756. Traditional sources report that some versions were divided into 64, 68, or 72 chapters, and some did not have chapter divisions. Henrik's 1982. The Mawangdui manuscript contains in some places a dot or period that appears to signal the beginning of a chapter. The earlier Gaudian texts, see below, are not divided into two parts, but in many places they employ a black square mark to indicate the end of a section. The sections or chapters so marked generally agree with the division in the present Laozi. Thus, although the 81 chapter formation may be relatively late, some attempt at chapter division seems evident from an early stage of the textual history of the Daodejing. Until about 2 decades ago, the Mawangdui manuscripts held the pride of place as the oldest extant manuscripts of the Laozi. In late 1993, the excavation of a tomb, identified as M1 in Daodejing City, Hubei Province, yielded among other things some 800 bamboo slips, of which 730 are inscribed, containing over 13,000 Chinese characters. Some of these, amounting to about 2,000 characters, match the Laozi. See Allen and Williams 2000 and Henrik's 2000. The tomb is located near the old capital of the state of Chu and is dated around 300 B.C.E. Robbers entered the tomb before it was excavated, although the extent of the damage is uncertain. The bamboo texts, written in a Chu script, have been transcribed into standard Chinese and published under the title Godian Chemu Sujian, Beijing Wenwu, 1998, which on the basis of the size and shape of the slip's calligraphy and other factors divides the Laozi material into 3 groups. Group A contains 39 bamboo slips, which correspond in whole or in part to the following chapters of the present text: 19, 66, 46, 30, 15, 64, 37, 63, 2, 32, 25, 5, 16, 64, 56, 57, 55, 44, 40, and 9. Groups B and C are smaller, with 18, Chase, 59, 48, 20, 13, 41, 52, 45, 54, and 14 slips Chess, 17, 18, 35, 31, 64, respectively. On the whole, the Gaudian bamboo slip Laozi is consistent with the received text, although the placement or sequence of the chapters is different, and there are numerous variant and/or archaic characters. Particularly, whereas chapter 19 of the current Laozi contains what appears to be a strong attack on Confucian ideals, cut off benevolence Ren, discard rightness Yai the Gaudian A. Text directs its readers to cut off artificiality, discard deceit. This has been taken to suggest that in the course of its transmission, the Laozi has taken on a more polemical outlook. However, the Gaudian C text indicates that Ren and Yai arose only after the great Tao had gone into decline, which agrees with chapter 18 of the current Laozi. In other words, it would be a hasty assumption that the Gaudian texts do not engage in a critique of some of the key ideas central to the Ru or Confucian tradition. It is not clear whether the Gaudian bamboo manuscripts were copied from one source and meant to be read as one text divided into 3 parts, whether they were selections from a longer original, or whether they were 3 different texts copied from different sources at different times for a nuanced discussion. See Bolt's 1999. There is one important clue, however. The A and C texts give two different versions of what is now part of chapter 64 of the Laozi, which suggests that they came from different sources. One scholar at least has suggested a chronology to the making of the Daodejing Laozi bamboo slips, with the A group being the oldest of the three, copied around 400 B.C.E. Ding 2007-9. Taking into account all the available evidence, it seems likely that different collections of sayings attributed to Laozi expanded and gained currency during the 4th century B.C.E. They would have been derived from earlier oral or written sources. During the 3rd century B.C.E., the Laozi settled more or less into its final form. It was then quoted extensively in such works as the Hanfizi and the outer and miscellaneous chapters of the Zhuangzi, and began to attract commentarial attention. Even more recently, the growing family of Laozi texts welcomed another new arrival. In January 2009, Peking University accepted a gift of a sizable collection of inscribed bamboo slips, said to have been retrieved from overseas. Among them, we find a nearly complete version of the Laozi. Although the published material to date did not mention any carbon dating of the slips, the consensus among the scholars who have worked with them is that they date to the Western Han dynasty. More precisely, based especially on the calligraphic form of the writing, a relatively mature form of the clerical script established during the Han period, they have been dated to the second half of the reign of Emperor Wu of the Han 14187 B.C.E. Like the Wangdui silk manuscripts, the Peking University text, now referred to as the Baida Laozi, is divided into two parts. They are titled Laozi Classic, Part 1 Laozi Heshanggong and Laozi Classic, Part 2 Laozi Daodejing. This indicates that not only the Laozi was divided into two parts during the Western Han period, but also it was accorded the status of a classic, Jing, which may give some credence to the traditional claim that the Laozi achieved canonical status during the preceding reign of Emperor Jing, 156-141 B.C. The B.C.E. Laozi agrees with the Wangdui manuscripts in another important respect, that is, Part 1 also corresponds to chapters 38 to 81 of the current 80 Huan, chapters 1 to 37, or Daodejing. Although this cannot be taken to mean that the Laozi was originally written in that order, it may be the case that this was the dominant textual tradition during the Han period. Like the Wangdui manuscripts, the Baida Laozi also records the number of characters at the end of each part. In terms of wording, the Baida Laozi agrees with the Wangdui manuscripts in many instances, although in some places it agrees rather with that of the received text. For example, whereas chapter 22 of the received text describes the sage as a model, she for the world, the Baida Laozi agrees with the Wangdui versions in likening the sage more concretely to a shepherd mule. However, the Baida text agrees with the standard version at the beginning of chapter 2, as opposed to the shorter formulation found in the Daodejing and Wangdui versions. What is equally significant is that the sequence or order of the chapters is exactly the same as that in the received Laozi. The difference lies in the division of some of the chapters. Chapters 17 to 19 of the received text form one chapter in the Baida Laozi. The same is true for chapters 6 to 7, 32 to 33, and 78 to 79. However, the current chapter 64 appears as two chapters in the Baida slips. Altogether, there are 77 chapters. Each chapter is clearly marked with a round dot at the start, and each chapter starts on a separate bamboo slip. The Baida Laozi is almost intact in its entirety, missing only some 60 characters when compared with the received text. While it offers fresh glimpses into the development of the text, it does not provide any significant new insight into the meaning of the Laozi. A series of articles on the Peking University bamboo slips were published in the journal Wenwu 2011, No. 6. The Baida Laozi was published in December 2012 and launched in February 2013. Although the majority of scholars accept the authenticity of the find, a notable critic is Zixing Wen, who argues strongly that it is a forgery. Xing 2016 for a critical discussion in English. See Foster 2017. In summary, two approaches to the making of the Laozi warrant consideration, for they bear directly on interpretation. A linear evolutionary model of textual formation would suggest that the earliest sayings attributed to Laozi address principally issues of governance, reflecting a deep concern with the decline of Zhou rule. Some of these sayings were preserved in the Guodian bamboo texts. On this view, the Laozi underwent substantial change and grew into a longer and more complex work during the 3rd century B.C.E., becoming in this process more polemical against the Confucian and other schools of thought, and acquiring new material of stronger metaphysical or cosmological interest. The Wang Bi manuscripts were based on this mature version of the Laozi. The original emphasis on politics, however, can still be detected in the placement of the Daodejing before the Daodejing. Later versions reversed this order and in so doing subsumed politics under a broader philosophical vision of Tao as the beginning and end of all beings. As distinguished from a linear evolutionary model, what is suggested here is that there were different collections of sayings attributed to Laozi, overlapping to some extent but each with its own emphasis and predilections, inhabiting a particular interpretive context. Although some key chapters in the current Laozi that deal with the nature of Daodejing, Chas. 1:14 are not found in the Guodian corpus, the idea that the Tao is born before heaven and earth, for example, which is found in chapter 25 of the received text, is already present. The critical claim that being Yu is born of non-being Wu in chapter 40 also figures in the Guodian text. This seems to argue against the suggestion that the Laozi, and for that matter ancient Chinese philosophical works in general, were not interested or lacked the ability to engage in abstract philosophic thinking, an assumption that sometimes appears to underlie evolutionary approaches to the development of Chinese philosophy. Another Guodian document, given the title Taiyi Shengshui, the Great One gives birth to the waters, translated in Ames and Hall, 2003, also see Bolt's 1999 and Allen 2003, and which may have formed an integral part of the Guodian Laozi text, certainly reflects strong interest in cosmogony and cosmology. The text known as Hengxian, one of the documents found in the corpus of bamboo slips recovered by the Shanghai Museum in 1994, and which I interpret in the sense of that which comes before and determines the created order, testifies further to the active engagement with cosmological and metaphysical questions in early China. Ma Chengyuan 2003, a special issue of the journal Dao 12.2, 2013, is devoted to this work. The Guodian and Wang Bi finds are extremely valuable. They are syntactically clearer than the received text in some instances, thanks to the larger number of grammatical particles they employ. Nevertheless, they cannot resolve all the controversies and uncertainties surrounding the Laozi. In my view, the nature of Tao and the application of Taoist insight to ethics and governance probably formed the twin foci in collections of Laozi sayings from the start. They were then developed in several ways, e.g., some collections were combined, new sayings were added, and explanatory comments, illustrations, and elaboration on individual sayings were integrated into the text. The demand for textual uniformity rose when the Laozi gained recognition, and consequently the different textual traditions eventually gave way to the received text of the Laozi. As mentioned, the current Laozi on which most reprints, studies and translations are based is the version that comes down to us along with the commentaries by Wang Bi and Heshanggong. 3 points need to be made in this regard. First, technically there are multiple versions of the Wang Bi and Heshanggong Laozi. Over 30 Heshanggong versions are extant, but the differences are on the whole minor. Second, the Wang Bi and Heshanggong versions are not the same, but they are sufficiently similar to be classified as belonging to the same line of textual transmission. Third, the Wang Bi and Heshanggong versions that we see today have suffered change. Prior to the invention of printing, when each manuscript had to be copied by hand, editorial changes and scribal errors are to be expected. In particular, the Laozi text that now accompanies Wang Bi's commentary bears the imprint of later alteration, mainly under the influence of the Heshanggong version, and cannot be regarded as the Laozi that Wang Bi himself had seen and commented on. Boltz, 1985, and Wagner, 1989, have examined this question in some detail. The current version refers to the Sibu Biyao and the Sibu Kongkan editions of the Daodejing. The Sibu Biyao and Sibu Kongkan are large-scale reproductions of traditional Chinese texts published in the early 20th century. The former contains the Wang Bi version and commentary, together with a colophon by the Song scholar Qiao Yuwaji, 1059 to 1129, a second note by Shang Qike, 1111 to 1184, and the Tang scholar Lu Deming's 556 to 627 Laozi Yeni glosses on the meaning and pronunciation of the Laozi. It is a reproduction of the Qing Dynasty Wang Palace edition, which in turn is based on a Ming edition, see especially Hatano 1979. The Heshanggong version preserved in the Sibu Kongkan series is taken from the library of the famous bibliophile Qu Wangfle, 1850. According to Ku's own catalog, this is a Song dynasty version, published probably after the reign of the Emperor Heshanggong R. 1163 to 1189. Older extant Heshanggong versions include two incomplete Tang versions and fragments found in Dunhuang. Besides the Guodian bamboo texts, the Mawangdui silk manuscripts, the Baida Laozi, and the received text of Wang Bi and Heshanggong, there is an ancient version, Guban, edited by the early Tang scholar Fu Yiflao, 600. Reportedly, this version was recovered from a tomb in 574 CE, whose occupant was a consort of the Chu general Shan Yudi, 202 B.C.E., the rival of Liu Bang before the latter emerged victorious and founded the Han dynasty. A later redaction of the ancient version was made by Fan Yingyuan in the Song dynasty. There are some differences, but these two can be regarded as having stemmed from the same textual tradition. Manuscript fragments discovered in the Dunhuang caves form another important source in Laozi research. Among them are several Heshanggong fragments, especially S. 477 and S. 3926 in the Stein collection and P. 2639 in the Peliot collection, and the important Xinye Laozi with commentary. Another Dunhuang manuscript that merits attention is the Suodan fragment, now at the University Art Museum, Princeton University, which contains the last 31 chapters of the Daodejing, beginning with chapter 51 of the modern text. It is signed and dated at the end, bearing the name of the 3rd century scholar and diviner Suodan, who is said to have made the copy, written in ink on paper, in 270 CE. According to Rao Zongyi, 1955, the Suodan version belongs to the Heshanggong line of the Laozi text. William Boltz, 1996, however, questions its 3rd century date and argues that the fragment in many instances also agrees with the Fu Yi ancient version. While manuscript versions inform textual criticism of the Laozi, stone inscriptions provide further collaborating support. Over 20 steles, mainly of Tang and Song origins, are available to textual critics, although some are in poor condition, Yan 1957. Students of the Laozi today can work with several Chinese and Japanese studies that make use of a large number of manuscript versions and stone inscriptions, notably Ma 1965, Zhang 1983, Zhu 1980, and Shima 1973. Boltz 1993 offers an excellent introduction to the manuscript traditions of the Laozi. Wagner 2003 attempts to reconstruct the original face of Wang Bi's Laozi safe. Lu 1980 and Lin 1999. A major contribution to Laozi studies in Chinese is Liu Shaogan 2006, which compares the Guodian Mawangdui, Fu Yi, Wang Bi, and Heshanggong versions of the Laozi and provides detailed textual and interpretive analysis for each chapter. In an article in English, Liu 2003 sets out some of his main findings. Thank you for watching. If you found this video insightful, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more thought-provoking content. We love hearing from you, so drop a comment below with your thoughts or any questions you have. Your feedback helps us create better content for you. See you in the next video.
you.